Welcome. In this video, we'll talk about how to find the base flood elevation, or BFE, for FEMA Zone A lakes. FEMA maps with a Zone AE have a base flood elevation, or BFE, shown right on the FEMA map and in the flood insurance study that accompanies the map. The BFE is basically what is commonly called the 100-year floodplain, or the 1% annual chance floodplain. Note that Zone A's, sometimes called approximate zones, don't have base flood elevations on the map or in the flood insurance study. FEMA maps have changed over time. The earliest Zone A's were on paper maps that showed the floodplain with dots, like this Blueberry Lake example. Later ones, in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, had paper maps similar to this one showing Hamel Lake. When FEMA started producing digital flood insurance rate maps, or FIRMs, in the early 2000s, the maps looked more like this with these aqua blue dots. And then as time went on and FEMA had later versions of the maps and viewers, this is what Zone A looks like. So you'll see the Zone A and this light blue coloring for the Zone A for that 100-year floodplain area. But first, let's talk briefly about why you might need the base flood elevations, or BFE. It's usually needed for one of two reasons, and in both cases, we need the BFE to the nearest tenth. So regulatory purposes or for purposes of requesting flood zone changes are the two main reasons we need the BFEs. The first is for the regulatory purposes. The federal minimum requirement is that new or substantially improved or damaged buildings must have their lowest floor at the BFE or higher. Note that many states and communities have higher standards. In Minnesota, we add at least 1 foot of freeboard to the BFE, plus add any increase in the flood elevations due to identifying the floodway, which is the part of the floodplain that must remain open to allow for flood flows during that 1% annual chance or 100-year flood. The other main reason a BFE is needed is when someone is told by their lender that flood insurance is mandatory since they have a federally backed loan and the building is in or touching the special flood hazard area, which is basically the floodplain area covered by that 100-year or 1% annual chance flood. FEMA has the letter of map amendment, or LOMA, process to provide more accurate building elevation data and show the building is higher than the BFE. If there's been filling, they'll need the BFE to get a letter of map revision based on fill, or LOMA-F. We have links to more information about applying for LOMAs and LOMA-Fs below this video. So let's learn about how to find the BFE when the FEMA map is Zone A. First, let's look at the easiest situation. For most of the counties that FEMA has updated since about 2020, FEMA required the mappers to have supporting models or analysis. For some of the newest counties, the BFE for the Zone A lakes are right on the FEMA map. Look at this example from 2023 in Minnesota's Pipestone County, and we'll see the Zone A label and the elevation to the nearest tenth of a foot right on the map. So we can use this for our BFE. And here we show that this lake, Lake Hendricks, is the 1277.8. In Minnesota, we have a few different counties that have this feature right now, in Itasca, Pipestone, and Pope counties. And that list will grow as we get newer maps for other counties. And a bit more about that datum. Most older maps are in NGVD 29 datum, and newer maps are in NAVD 88 datum. And these datums, they just use different reference points, and they're like the difference between Fahrenheit and Celsius. You're not changing the elevation, but the scale is different. So this example here in NGVD 29, it's at the elevation 713, but in NAVD 88, it's at 714, even though we haven't changed the location of the building. And be aware that in Minnesota, the difference between NGVD 29 and NAVD 88 can range from 0 in the southeast corner of the state to 1.4 feet in some areas in the northwest part of the state where the glaciers left more recently and the land is actually still rebounding from those glaciers leaving the area. But finding BFEs for Zone A lakes is usually more complicated. For the official FEMA guidance, you can find the FEMA policy that was issued in 2018. If you search for FEMA policy 104-008-2 or FEMA best available data, you should find it. But the gist is that federal regulations require that BFEs be developed for the bigger new developments, those with 50 lots or 5 acres, whichever is less, and otherwise we, quote, obtain, review, and reasonably utilize any base flood elevation and floodway data available from a federal, state, or other source, end quote. That is what we generally call best available data. Also note that we'll put any of these links we mention in the description below this video. Click the More to see all the notes and links. Here are some of the best available data sources we'll be discussing. This video is focusing on BFE best available data in Minnesota, but we'll start with some of the sources that are available nationally. And then we'll talk about a Minnesota-specific viewer and other specific Minnesota sources. The first possible source is when FEMA has issued preliminary new maps for your county of interest. While it's not real common, sometimes the preliminary new maps will have new Zone AE or detailed study areas. If the preliminary new maps do have Zone AE in an area that's currently Zone A, that preliminary new map data is considered the best available data. Even if there are not new Zone AE areas, virtually all Zone A areas on new maps done since 2020 have supporting data for all the A zones, and many of the digital new FEMA maps since about 2005 have supporting hydrology reports summarizing BFEs for lakes and bigger basins. So, how do we go about seeing these preliminary new maps? First, we go to FEMA's Flood Map Changes Viewer. Those counties that are shown in this pinkish color have preliminary new maps. So here's an example. This is Polk County in Minnesota, and I know that it has some areas that are Zone AE, but on the current effective map are Zone A. So here's the example of what the current effective map looks like. And yes, 1983 is when it became effective. So let's zoom in on the new preliminary maps and see what data we have. I look here, I'm in the same general area, and I'm seeing the preliminary new mapping here. There are these dots on the map because we don't have a current digital map. We don't have a current map layer here. So we're going to zoom in and turn off the effective firm panels to make those dots go away. So now those dots are gone and we can look more closely. We can zoom in, but I'm at this level because I want to show where the cross sections are. So we've got a cross section here and a cross section here. So we can be looking at the data in our flood insurance study for the preliminary new maps and determining the base flood elevation at this reach here. In some of the other digital new map counties, there may not be detailed study, but they may have done some hydrology reports. Here's an example from LeSueur County. The report was issued in 2019, and in that report, one of the tables shows the lakes and shows the 1% annual chance flood elevation to that nearest tenth of a foot that we need. So we could use that information as our best available data for those lakes. And even some of our earlier map updates, we did have reports with elevations for many of the lakes, like in this example for Kandiyohi County that was issued in 2006. Even before FEMA issues preliminary new flood insurance rate maps, sometimes we can find and use the draft data. As mentioned before, for the newer FEMA map updates, the mappers are required to develop supporting models or other analysis to determine estimated 1% annual chance flood elevations. In Minnesota, you can check with DNR staff on whether we have draft data that has gone through the initial review and quality control steps and can be shared as best available data for those BFEs. Most other states also have options to share that data. And sometimes we have mappers like this for Winona County, where this is draft data, but they're showing the proposed flood elevations and cross sections. So we can look at that data here and we can zoom in and look at that area and turn on an aerial photo background and make that floodplain layer a little bit more transparent so we can see the buildings that we're concerned about, and we can see the flood elevations at the different cross sections here. We can use this as best available data to determine that BFE. Here are some other sources for best available data to get a BFE. Your community stormwater management plan, watersheds may have modeling, the Corps of Engineers, or other state, federal, or community studies. Contact your community to see if they know of other sources. And in Minnesota, you can contact the DNR and see if we're aware of any sources. And we'll work with the community and watershed to find those sources if they're available. If you don't have preliminary new or pending FEMA maps or one of those other sources, one more possible source is letters of map amendments or letters of map revisions based on fill in the area. To find those, go to FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer Viewer. You'll want to expand the layers, go to the National Flood Hazard Layer, and then choose the LOMA layer here and turn that on. That's not on in the default. Once you click that on, you'll see these purple dots show up where there are letters of map amendments or letters of map revisions based on fill. We're going to zoom in a bit here and look at this case here because it's near our site of interest. So we'll zoom in on that purple dot. Sometimes you have to fiddle around to click on that purple dot, but you'll get this pop-out box that will come. And in that pop-out box, it will have the address and usually some kind of short legal description, but it will have this download letter here link. If you click on that, it will take you to the FEMA site where you can get a copy of this determination document. In this determination document, the older determinations, those that are about 2013 and earlier, they'll actually have the base flood elevation here. In newer cases, the FEMA documents will not show the BFE unless it was a denial. But it does have the lowest adjacent grade for the building if they got the LOMA or LOMA-F for the building. And if they got the LOMA or LOMA-F for a full lot or a portion of the lot, they'll have the elevation here. You'll know that the BFE is below these elevations, at or below these elevations, if they had a successful LOMA or LOMA-F. One more option is that you can apply for a letter of map amendment if you can't find a BFE, and you'll fill out the form, note that you checked with the state, community, etc., and that we weren't able to find any existing BFE data. And then you request that the FEMA LOMA reviewer determine the BFE for you. The FEMA reviewer will determine the BFE, but it's likely to be on the conservative side. This is only an option for a single lot, not for the multi-lot requests. FEMA has an old document from 1985 that discusses some other possible sources for determining BFEs in approximate Zone A's. The contour interpolation is one of those options where you use GIS or other viewers like Minnesota's Lake and Flood Elevations Online site or our Mintopo site to compare flood zone boundaries to the 2-foot contours. If the contours are clearly following an elevation, we'll try to find the supporting analysis and the BFE that they use to map that boundary. Sometimes we can't find that data, but we can use that contour to estimate a base flood elevation, though we will estimate on the conservative side. If it's an older FEMA map, the contour interpolation will usually be a last resort estimate of the BFE and will likely be on the conservative side. There are some other examples of methods in this old document, but most of them are not that helpful, and the other examples we're giving in this presentation are more helpful. So in Minnesota, we have a few other options. The first of those is what we call our shoreland method. And in Minnesota, we have shoreland management regulations. Those regulations apply within 1,000 feet of the bigger lakes and 300 feet of rivers or to the edge of the floodplain. But our shoreland management regulations require that all buildings within that shoreland district, which can extend much further than the floodplain, that they have to meet minimum elevations. And in those regulations, we say, if we have the flood elevation for that area, we use our minimum elevation for the buildings, which on lakes in Minnesota, that's going to be our 100-year flood elevation, plus at least a foot of freeboard. If we don't have the regulatory flood protection elevation or the BFE determined, what our shoreline management rules say is you use the ordinary high water level, which is the official boundary of the basin, or the highest known water level plus 3 feet. So that's going to be your minimum elevation if you don't know the base flood elevation and have the RFPE. Since this minimum elevation includes a foot of freeboard, we say that our BFE estimate would be 2 feet above the ordinary high or highest known water level. So here's another drawing that shows that same concept, that you'd be 3 feet above the ordinary high or highest known water level for that lowest floor, or you take a foot of freeboard and add it to the base flood elevation to get that lowest floor. So our estimated BFE is 2 feet above ordinary high or highest known. We do have this info sheet that was recently updated that explains this method. And in our links below the video, we'll have a link to this information sheet. And we do want to note that FEMA reviewers have accepted this method for lakes in Minnesota. If you're in Minnesota, we have one more place to check lake base flood elevations in our Lake and Flood Elevations Online viewer. Let's take a look at our legend, and you'll see that we've classified our lakes with different colors based on the information we have available for those lakes. Those with this darker color, we have more detailed information on flood elevations available through this viewer. The other lakes, this medium color blue, we would have the ordinary high and some highest recorded elevations. And the lighter color lakes, we don't have any lake elevations or flood elevations on this viewer. So if we click on the lake, we'll see this pop-out box. And note that sometimes you have to go to the second page of the pop-out box to see this. We do have this docking option up here. If you click on that, it will move it over to the side so you can still be seeing your lake area. And here we have the the 100-year flood elevation, as I mentioned. And then we also have that datum that the study used, and we have the study source listed out here and the date of that source. I mentioned that we have these other sources of information for some of the lakes where we don't have all the flood elevations right in there, but we have some useful information. Select that basin. We'll get this pop-out box. We'll use our docking option here. So we move this pop-out over to the side so we can see the lake area better and still see this data. And we'll have the basin ID, we'll have that ordinary high and highest recorded. And so this basin might be a good candidate to use our shoreland method. We recommend that you work with the community and the DNR to verify that that's the best data sources, or to see if they might have some other best available data that hasn't been entered in this viewer. Again, contact your community and DNR staff. They may have best available data for your site, and your community can work with DNR staff to get a BFE. You can reach out to the DNR staff at floodplain.dnr@state.mn.us, and DNR staff can direct you to other available data. We can look at the latest mapping data development, see if it's far enough along to share as best available data, and we can help look at many of the sources we've discussed, or use other available data like nearby bridge hydraulics or other sources. And DNR will keep the local zoning permitting official in the loop. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to learn more about the FEMA-mapped Service Center, you can go to that site using this QR code. And if you'd like to learn how to make a FEMA-mapped, a FEMA map on that MAP Service Center site, see our Is My House in a Floodplain video, and we've got the QR code for that. To see other videos in our series on finding BFEs in Zone AE and Zone A, look below this video and you'll see this gray box and this More. If you click on that More, or within the gray box, you'll get an expanded view, and we'll have links to the other videos in the series and other links to useful resources related to this topic. Again, thanks for listening.